Do the Right Thing to me is such an important movie. A daring drama that accesses the issues of racism and class from every possible angle. Do the Right Thing is unflinching in its depiction of community spirit, violence, and injustice, telling a story that is just as timely as it is frustrating, as darkly humorous as it is tragic, and as eye-opening as it is necessary. The movie phenomenally showcases Spike Lee at the height of his powers and refusing to take any prisoners. It's difficult to watch, constantly relevant, and is undoubtedly Spike Lee's cinematic magnum opus. Out of all the Star Wars content that has been released for the past 46 years, The Empire Strikes Back still stands head and shoulders above the rest, as it represents the pinnacle of the entire franchise. Empire just cranked things up all the way to 11, as it established Star Wars as a truly great series by expanding upon everything of what made the first film great. It goes to like a much more darker approach. It effectively makes its heroes and villains more complex, the introduction of new characters like Yoda and Lando Calrissian, the blossoming romance between Han Solo and Princess Leia, and of course, the best of all, the unforgettable plot twist. I don't really have much more praise to give to Empire Strikes Back other than to say it's a flawlessly paced space opera. I mean, come on, who the fuck doesn't love Back to the Future? It's just one of those movies that is so impossible to hate because it has such a magnificent way of combining sci-fi and comedy into one, standing as the most fitting marriage of two genres. Directed by Robert Zemeckis, this Spielberg-infused family sci-fi comedy is as charismatic as movies get, thanks in part to its two lead protagonists with Michael J. Fox's Marty McFly and the ruffled comedy of Christopher Lloyd's Doc Brown, to tell a compelling concept that burrows into your brain so effortlessly that you wonder how this was the first time anyone has ever explored it. Back to the Future managed to cram in action, adventure, comedy, romance, and cutting-edge special effects into the single film, and somehow, someway, it worked out beautifully. With all those elements is what makes Back to the Future such a rewatchable classic. And while Back to the Future 2 and 3 were pretty damn good, the original is just where it's at. Even though Sylvester Stallone is universally known for his iconic performance as Rocky Balboa in the Rocky series, but when it came to Rambo First Blood, it's the movie that solidified his place as an action movie icon that he is today, showcasing his incredible dramatic range. Despite the explosive and excessive nature of its future sequels, First Blood is unquestionably the best of the entire Rambo series, as it not only proved to have everything fans of action movies could ask for, but also a compelling story about a traumatized Vietnam War veteran John Rambo who suffers from PTSD. Rambo First Blood is such a damn good action movie that has such a depressing story of a man who is unable to cope with his traumatic experiences, somebody who is heavily misunderstood by society, but it also does an exceptional job as a commentary on the way the Vietnam War negatively affected its soldiers, and showcasing Sylvester Stallone's knack for carrying an action movie and created one of the most enduring action hero characters of all time. Although Back to the Future was a technical achievement, especially for its effects showing the iconic DeLorean timeline travels, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is the first movie that truly showed how important of a VFX pioneer Robert Zemeckis is. Who Framed Roger Rabbit's incorporations of cartoon characters into live-action footage is not only an incredible visual effect that still holds up decades later, but it overall changed the way how movies are made. It has a murder mystery plot that works to its fantastic noir-inspired tone, with also working as a great action comedy film. And of course, I can't forget to mention this movie without its iconic characters with Roger Rabbit himself, the late Bob Hoskins as the character of Eddie Valiant, and of course, the best of all, the luscious piece of ass herself, Jessica Rabbit, who is just, a tall drink of water. Heathers is a movie that's way ahead of its time. I'll never forget watching it a couple years back for the first time, and it was so eye-opening to me. At a time when the late John Hughes was dominating the 80s by revolutionizing the teen coming-of-age genre with colorful characters and happy endings, Heathers felt a lot more different from that, because it's a film that did such a wonderful job of showcasing how stupid and how deplorable people can be, especially when it comes to treating serious situations like suicide or mental health as a complete joke. Winona Ryder and Christian Slater were excellent in their respective roles as Veronica and JD, acting out a Bonnie and Clyde-esque style misadventure involving the staged suicides of the popular kids from their high school. Even with Heathers being released 35 years ago, it's a movie that has remained relevant by leaving an indelible mark on teen drama, influencing movies like Clueless and Mean Girls, and even TV shows like Gossip Girl and Pretty Little Liars. Throughout the 80s, the late great John Hughes defined a generation with his classic films. He was responsible for writing, directing, and producing films that warmed our hearts and had us laughing till we cried. But out of all the classics he's been involved with, The Breakfast Club to me stands as his magnum opus. A definitive ode to teenhood, The Breakfast Club has 5 radically different high school students whom find themselves facing detention on a very tedious Saturday morning. It's a movie that cuts deeper than any cliches or reputations you've ever been a part of back in high school. Though it's easy to see each student as a walking, talking stereotype, the very brilliance of The Breakfast Club subverts all of them, peeling back the layers of their perfectly cultivated images to create relatable struggling kids with troubles to spare. A personal odyssey that reminds us not to judge others and accept ourselves. The Breakfast Club is a quintessential 80s masterclass that highlights the social pressures of high school and gives us a story of love, friendship, and redemption. Directed by Richard Donner, The Goonies was a childhood staple for me. The movie was an endless loop in my house because I remember me and my sisters watched The Goonies all the time like there was no tomorrow. It's a classic kids adventure movie from an era when the coming-of-age genre was going through its most prolific period as it captured the imagination of an entire generation. Much like The Breakfast Club, the coming-of-age aspects of The Goonies is played on adolescent stereotypes with the jock, the nerd, and so on together and recognizing their shared aim rather than focusing on their differences. But it's the unadulterated fun the film exudes which makes it more entertaining. With the impeccable chemistry with all the cast of the main characters, to Richard Donner's direction, and the superb screenwriting from Chris Columbus is all what gives The Goonies its irreproachable charm. Now, I love me some Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy was at his prime throughout the 80s. After starring in a spree of movies from 48 Hours, Trading Places, even Beverly Hills Cop, he had truly solidified himself as the new king of comedy. However, when it came to Coming to America, it brilliantly showcased Eddie Murphy's talents as not just as a comedian, but also as a writer as well, considering the fact that he came up with the story of the movie. Murphy stars as Prince Akeem, who's from a fictional country called Zamunda, whom travels all the way to Queens, New York to find a woman to marry after rejecting an arranged marriage that was set up by his parents. Sure, the film's premise may be very simple because of the typical fish out of water story, but I just really love the way how it shows people the struggles that celebrities deal with while dating, because of the way how Akeem wants a girl to love him for who he is and not how much money he has or how much he's worth. Supported by an exceptional cast, including the legendary James Earl Jones, Arsenio Hall, a cameo from Samuel L. Jackson, and even the legendary John Amos as Cleo McDowell, the film has top-notch humor and memorable lines that are still quoted to this very day. 35 years later, Coming to America has aged beautifully, as it literally has nothing but iconic scene after iconic scene throughout its entirety, and it holds up as a bona fide rom-com classic. The less said about the subsequent sequel, the better. To any of y'all who are longtime viewers on my channel, y'all should know that I'm a huge lover of coming-of-age stories. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola, The Outsiders is a cult classic film for people of a certain age, as it contains a certain amount of class and is faithful to its source novel by S.C. Hinton. It also features a ridiculous amount of big names in Hollywood, from the late great Patrick Swayze, Matt Dillon, Tom Cruise, Rob Lowe, C. Thomas Howell, Ralph Macchio, Emilio Estevez, and Diane Lane. It's a film that has a lot to say about loyalty and friendship among kids, as it deals with class differences, and your heart will be with the greasers, whom all have endured hard lives and must adapt to that, especially Ponyboy and his two brothers, who have endured an awful amount of heartache and turmoil. With the entire cast giving all wonderful performances, The Outsiders still stands the test of time as a moving drama about troubled teenagers. Evil Dead 2 superbly captures everything that made the first movie so brilliant, but it cranked things all the way up to 11. It also brings comedy into the forefront in a way that the franchise would adopt wholeheartedly, making this easily the most well-balanced between horror and comedy the franchise has ever produced. This is also the movie that birthed the Ash Williams that we all know and love. While Bruce Campbell's character certainly shined in the first film, this was the film that turned him into the wild, raving, captivating madman that he had become. Overall, Evil Dead 2 launched the series into even greater cult classic status, as it has the horror, the violence, the comedy, and most importantly, Ash. The movie is just the purest form of the Evil Dead's best elements. Although Blade Runner's initial reviews weren't well received upon its release back in 1982, this sci-fi classic has grown more popular and has gained more appreciation over time to the point where now it's one of the most acclaimed movies of all time, and deservedly so. My absolute favorite aspect of Blade Runner is how elegantly and intelligently it explores the concept of quote-unquote humanity. Between the perfect vision of the dilapidated futuristic world the characters inhabit, to Roy Batty's iconic Tears in the Rain monologue in the final act, the movie manages to maintain its sci-fi thriller credentials whilst also crafting a deeply philosophical story about humanism and morality. Overall, Blade Runner is undoubtedly one of the most timeless movies of all time, as it solidified Ridley Scott as one of the best filmmakers of his generation, and for my money, this is his magnum opus. Back in the summer of 1981, Steven Spielberg would partner up with his buddy George Lucas as they would grace the world with one of the most iconic characters and movies of all time with Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. To say that Raiders of the Lost Ark is the perfect action-adventure movie would be a massive understatement, because with the combination of the mind of George Lucas and the expertise of Steven Spielberg, should you expect anything less of this movie being less than extraordinary? Harrison Ford was born to play Indiana Jones, as he perfectly captures the vulnerability and the charm of the character. It amazes me the way how he transitioned from playing Han Solo in the Star Wars trilogy to playing Indiana Jones. They're two of the top 10 most iconic movie characters of all time, and he portrays both characters both to perfection. That's just so unheard of. It's just brilliant. Plus, I can't forget to mention Karen Allen as Marion Ravenwood. The chemistry between her and Indiana Jones is just absolutely magnificent, as she goes above the generic love interest stereotype, and instead she is built like the female counterpart to Indy, which really set the bar for strong leading ladies in most action movies. With John Williams' excellent musical score, the iconic action set pieces, and the amazing use of practical effects, Raiders of the Lost Ark is an undeniable, timeless, action-packed classic that is endlessly rewatchable and is without question Steven Spielberg's greatest efforts. Filled with guns, excessive violence, luxurious cars, and heavy drug use, Scarface demonstrates the self-destruction of Cuban immigrant Tony Montana, from his meteoric rise as a drug kingpin to his eventual downfall. Al Pacino gave one of the most unforgettable performances ever put to screen. Despite the character committing deplorable acts, director Brian De Palma did such a masterful job of making us empathize with the character of Tony Montana by perfectly illustrating a story about a ruthless underdog scratching and clawing his way to the top by achieving the American dream. It's undoubtedly one of the best gangster movies ever made, not just because of the subtlety and glamour where the others had their strengths, but for something that is superior to the others of the same genre. It's cruel, it's raw, and it's thoroughly enjoyable to watch from time to time. For a guy like me who has always been a huge sucker for happy endings, Return of the Jedi has always been my favorite of the original Star Wars trilogy. While sure it may not reach the same heights as A New Hope or Empire, it's still a great movie nonetheless, because make no mistake about it, it's still packed with some of the best moments of the entire Star Wars saga. The third act is easily the highlight of the entire movie, where we have 3 battles all happening at once, with Lando clariously leading the charge in the space battle, the ground battle on Endor with Princess Leia, Han Solo, and Chewbacca battling the stormtroopers with the help of the Ewoks, and the best of all, the throne room sequence between Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Emperor Palpatine, which is the beating heart of the entire movie. Despite some of the aspects of this movie coming out to be a little bit too silly and cartoonish, Return of the Jedi was a fantastic conclusion to the original Star Wars trilogy by tying up its loose ends and riveting character arcs with violent and heartwarming payoffs to spare.